Good morning, and I really don't need this escort to come up, but we are trying to facilitate the program today and move it just a little bit faster. So this is the panel coming up immediately afterwards. I want to welcome all of you to the Corporate Council on Africa's 6th Infrastructure Conference on Africa, U.S.-Africa Infrastructure. It is also good that the purposes of such conferences is that it's in some ways brings back, it's a reunion for people who haven't seen one another in a long time to continue to build business, but it's also a great opportunity for new members. So it's always exciting in that regard. We have over 400 people registered for this conference. This conference is being held also in Washington's most difficult building to find your way around. So I suspect that people will come in as the morning unfolds. Before we go into any remarks, I also want to say that the lifeblood of the organization is membership, and it's our program revenue. The program revenue is not possible without sponsors. This year we have a record number of sponsors, 31 companies for this infrastructure conference, and because of that, and because frankly we did exceed our goals, there were a couple of the companies that asked that their support go to scholarships particularly for members. So we're very grateful to that extra help from sponsors. Those sponsors are Petrolin Trading, Symbion Power, Caterpillar, Cardno Emerging Markets, Michael Baker International, South African Airways, Acrow Bridges, Freeport McMoran, General Electric, Mota-Engil, Africa Finance Corporation, Black & Veatch, the entails Group, Bechtel Limited, PTA Bank, and PTA Bank is based in Burundi, Millennium Challenge Corporation, Freshfields Bruckhaus Derringer, U.S. law firm. They are not a U.S. law firm, by the way, but it's U.S. as part of their title. PwC, PricewaterhouseCoopers, CTG, ERM, Pioneer Equipment Company, Nationwide Finance, Hart Security, All Africa Global Media, Africa Trade, Jean Afrique, Oxford Business, MEA, the U.S. Department of Commerce, the U.S. Agency for International Development, and the Ronald Reagan Building and International Trade Center. All those, thank you, and please acknowledge those. Thank you. We've had a banner year in 2014, very frankly, and we've got some exciting news to share this morning as well. CCA's membership has exceeded 180 companies, consisting of nearly 40 African companies and 145 U.S. companies. They not only represent 85% of all U.S. private investment in Africa, they also now, because we have included African companies and some of the leading African companies throughout the continent are now part of CCA, there's opportunities for new partnerships for our own members, both ways. 40% of our membership is SMEs. The historic mark has been accompanied by back-to-back years of 60 new companies joining CCA, which is nearly double the average of new companies each year. In just 2 years of targeting African companies, 19% of the membership is now African membership. In 2014, we not only did 3 trade missions, which is the most we've ever done in 1 year. It's with all due reference to the respect to the U.S. Department of Commerce. That's 3 times more than the U.S. Department of Commerce has done this year. We are going to do 3 more before the end of the year. At least 3 more are scheduled. Those 3 will be to Zimbabwe, Tanzania, Zambia, and then to Kenya, Rwanda, Uganda, and then tentatively scheduled still Equatorial Guinea and Republic of Congo, which may be moved to 2015. We already took trade missions to Gabon, DRC, Kenya earlier, as well, Ethiopia, Ghana, and Cote d'Ivoire. The infrastructure conference has become a very crucial part of our work and our work plan over the years in order to facilitate the investment in Africa. Our mission, which is I repeat to our staff probably at least once a week in one way or another, our primary mission is to serve our members. We need to increase U.S. investment in Africa. But we do that by supporting our members' interest and supporting the interest of Africa. Our very first infrastructure conference took place in 2006. It's grown from its first meeting of 140 participants to over 400 attendees this year. The conference has provided fertile ground for collaboration between the U.S. and African businesses and infrastructure projects across the continent, totaling billions, leading to projects such as the construction of over 100 bridges in Ghana by Acrow Bridge, and I think Acrow is also doing business elsewhere in Africa now. And past conferences have also led to increase their focus on infrastructure investment in Africa, such as the U.S. government's AGOA conference, and which has led ministerial debate on infrastructure for trade. On AGOA, to digress slightly, on AGOA, we think that AGOA will work much better if we focus first on infrastructure development, capacity building. CCA has led the way in its focus on renewable energy. There was the lead topic in the 2010 infrastructure conference, and also the 2012 trade mission led by Secretary Johnny, at the time, Assistant Secretary of State for Africa, Johnny Carson, and our Vice President, Robert Perry, which focused entirely on Africa and visited 6 countries. We would like to think that it was a good precedence for the Power Africa agenda in 2013, announced by President Obama. Yesterday's discussion on doing business with the African Development Bank will help American companies, we believe, take advantage of ADB. We believe that American companies generally, well, actually no, American companies have not taken advantage of the opportunities to work with the African Development Bank. We're also very happy to announce that the African Development Bank has joined CCA. So thank you to ADB. You can applaud that, by the way, because the because the African Development Bank is sitting up here up front, so thank you. Yesterday's discussion on doing business with the African Development Bank, I think, will help in many ways, just as yesterday's discussion on Ebola, bringing together with us the lead, the Commissioner on Health for Lagos State, who has led the efforts in Nigeria to make Nigeria Ebola-free, which is an extraordinary presentation yesterday. We will work with our members and are already working with the State Department and others on that and what corporations can do effectively to help stem the tide of Ebola. This year's focus is on building resilient cities, and we think it's especially timely because our increased focus recognizes today the growing metropolises of Africa and the urban migration. Increasing demand for energy, water, and ICT and transportation infrastructure will drive we hope bold investment and collaboration between the U.S. and Africa. These growing cities provide not only immense opportunities, but also new challenges for infrastructure development. As urban populations grow and become more concentrated, the challenges of public health crises, natural disasters, and climate change increase both in size and complexity, and they do represent opportunity for the private sector to be of assistance and to make a difference to the development processes of Africa. CCA continues to recognize these new challenges with a panel on urban infrastructure and emergency. I'm happy to say that Deputy Chairperson of the African Union Commission, the Honorable Erastus Mwencha, will be presenting on future-proofing urban infrastructure and climate change in Africa. His plane should be arriving now. I will also say that for some of you who are new, the Corporate Council on Africa is the only U.S. business organization and one of the very few in the U.S. that has an MOU with the African Union, which we value very highly. Mr. Mwencha's panel is especially timely in advance of next month's African Union Climate Resilient Infrastructure Summit in Addis Ababa, which we hope will be represented. Throughout the panel, this year's conference will provide an invaluable forum for African states and U.S. businesses to catalyze long-term infrastructure goals for the next generation of business cooperation between Africa and the United States. There's far too many highlights. I'm not going to go over each panel. It'd bore you to tears. And we do think that the panels are very exciting. We think that they can make a difference, but especially some new features or features that I want to call your attention to. We're returning to the vault, what's called the vault. This year's vault will provide opportunities for investors, entrepreneurs, financial institutions to explore opportunities for collaboration and investment in Africa infrastructure. I'm told it's like a speed dating process, but having never gone through speed dating myself, and also just brings too much painful memories of my high school days, we will just not talk about speed dating, but it will be an opportunity for you to sit and meet with potential financiers and many others on a very quick notice and to build those networks. This year's participants in the vault will be representatives from the United Bank of Africa, the Africa Finance Corporation, the U.S. Trade and Development Agency, and the Africa Development Bank, among many others. Across the 2 days of workshops and plenaries, we will cover a broad range of energy investment opportunities from hydropower to gas, transportation, port infrastructure, telecommunications, water, sanitation, and construction on the continent. These are all opportunities that, frankly, U.S. companies have not taken advantage of. Our mission is to make a difference for our members and make a difference for Africa. We want you to take advantage of that. We want you to use us to help you to be successful. I think the future shines very bright for those who are interested in Africa, obviously. And I think it's also very bright for CCA. In 2015, related to the infrastructure conference, we will be doing a U.S.-Africa agribusiness conference in Cambridge, Massachusetts. We have struck an agreement. We hope it will be a very long-term agreement with the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, to work together on agribusiness development. In part of the reason that MIT is engaged is to stem the migration and really work, how do we really make agriculture effective in Africa, plus how do we make it exciting enough that people will stay in the area and work on agriculture and agribusiness. So we think that's going to be a very unique conference. It was made possible, one of our members' ideas from Africa, the company is called Africa Atlantic. It has grown to a cooperation between MIT, Harvard to a lesser extent, the Al Magir Foundation in Qatar, and CCA. CCA was also awarded this year a grant from what I could think of as our partners at USAID, focused on trade and Power Africa. USAID has designated CCA as the lead on President Obama's Power Africa initiative. CCA will also host, as was decided by our board of directors yesterday, CCA will also host its 2015 biennial summit in Addis Ababa. This is only the second time we are taking our summit to Africa. It's the most important U.S.-Africa business meeting, beyond any doubt. It will be held in Addis in the shadows and in cooperation with the African Union. So we're very excited by that. We think that the American businesses who have their headquarters for Africa in Europe and in Dubai, it will be an opportunity for an enormous program and I think a very significant statement by the United States, and not just CCA, that we are in Africa to compete for business. So the successes of this year will continue to multiply into our programs next year, and infrastructure will continue to be at the base of many of those programs. So again, we're very, very grateful that you are a part of that. This organization doesn't exist without its members. Its members don't stay with us if they're not doing business in Africa. So we're very indebted to membership. We're indebted to people like you who come to these events, because we think these events do make a difference, and we hope they'll make a difference for you. So thank you. Now it's my pleasure to start moving into the actual program, and I want to introduce to you one of our sponsors from Benin, Mr. Samuel Dossou, who is Chairman and CEO of Petrolin Group. We are working with him on a special project as well. Mr. Dossou.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to share with you a dream I had more than 15 years ago. This film you saw is a summary of this dream. It's about infrastructure, because I am convinced that to develop Africa, we need infrastructure. We are used to think that we have to wait for the state to do something. My example, I want to bring it to you and to bring also to the new generation who have a good training, to tell them that you can start your dream and the state can join you after, and international players can join you after. I will surprise you telling you that I am not an infrastructure man. I am the oil businessman. My company, Petrolin Group, I created in '92 in London with a branch in Geneva, and today we have many companies in production, exploration, production, and trading in Africa and in Middle East. Now, the example I want to show here is that the experience you can get in a field can help you to develop another field. In oil business, the first thing I learned when I was involved in exploration production is that no bank will lend you money to make exploration. You learn also that even you have a production, if you don't take some money from your profit to invest in exploration, you will not stay long in oil business. Is this principle also of the fact that in oil, you can have a permit and ask for partners, ask for service provider to help you to develop your permit. There are those principles I apply to infrastructure in Benin. Look at the map of Benin. You see that this country is naturally situated as a natural port for the hinterland countries in the north, like Niger and Burkina Faso. Even the north of Nigeria sometimes is better to take the goods through the Benin corridor. Also, you see that Benin has more than 700 borders with Nigeria. With in the south a big proximity with Lagos port, who is often congested. In the north also, you see that countries like Niger, Burkina Faso, even the north of Benin, has big potential for minerals. Then based on all those ideas, it came to me to conceive, develop, and put money in this infrastructure project I'm doing now in Benin. My money at this stage came from my exploration of oil. I took some part of the money of exploration of my group to invest in this infrastructure project, where today we are working at the south of Benin on a petroleum and mineral port. Petroleum because we are sure that we have petroleum in Benin, and also we know that we have petroleum in Niger and potential things in the north of Benin. Now, on top of that, if you come back to the map of Benin, you see that we have a railway going from Cotonou, the economical capital, to Parakou in the center of the country. And this railway belongs to Niger and Benin, because it was built by France before the years 60, the independence years, and France give it to the two countries 50-50. Then those two countries are owner of the railway. When I came for my backbone project with a petroleum port in the one terminal of this railway, and with a dry port in Parakou, the two countries say that this railway, to be able to exploit it, you have to submit to a tender. Then they launch an international tender. We have many applicants, and my group, Petrolin, we win. That's an example I want new generation in Africa to understand. In oil, even you have a permit, if you are not expert in everything, if you are not expert in seismic, in drilling, and so on, you can have partners who will join you in your interest and work and develop the field. It's the same thing I did here. And since 2007, when we were engaged in this project, we have put millions and millions of dollars to make studies on the railway, including the audit study meter by meter from Cotonou to the end of the railway today. This done by number one or number two company in the railway business. It was Indian Railways with its affiliate rights. We did also many studies in petroleum port in the south with a Canadian company called Roche, and we have finished already the bathymetry and the environmental studies. In the other terminal of this railway in Parakou, we are on the way to finish a dry port being a port who will help all the congested port there to be able to send to the dry port their containers so that it will give more capacity to the port of Cotonou. Now, today, where are we? And what can I propose to American businessmen? Today, all over the country of Benin, we have negotiated, and it took a long time. We have negotiated with the government all environmental, economical, fiscal term of all projects who will be done on this backbone project. Today we have what we call Code des Investissements EA in Benin, which is the investment code for infrastructure. We have it. It's difficult to have it now if you don't start early like we did. Now we are proposing to all our potential partners to come with us. Even they are service provider, this framework contract is applicable to them. If they are partner in the deal, this framework contract we have for 40 years is applicable also to them. This simple example is what I would like to expose here to say that even you are not in one field, you can take your experience you have in another field to promote something else. Petrolin Group is in oil business. We are one of the major producers of gas in Nigeria, supplying more than 50% of the population. On top of that, we are supplying the West African pipeline, giving gas to Benin, Togo, and Ghana. We are a producer in Yemen also, since many years. We are producers in Gabon also. And in terms of exploration, we are involved in more than 10 countries in Africa. Thank you very much for listening to me. I am at your disposal for all questions. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Well, good morning. My name is David Picard, and I am Caterpillar's regional manager covering Africa and the Middle East, based in Geneva. And it's an absolute pleasure and an honor to be here with you this morning to moderate this conversation on what is arguably the greatest challenge to Africa's global competitiveness and one of the greatest opportunities for all of the business leaders that are gathered here today in this room. We're talking about infrastructure. Now, at Caterpillar, we believe that the road to progress starts with a road. And as the world's leading manufacturer of construction and mining equipment, diesel and natural gas engines, industrial gas turbines, and diesel locomotives, Caterpillar is uniquely positioned to help African countries and African businesses meet their infrastructure needs going forward. Our company has, I think, a really rich history on the continent of Africa. In fact, our first dealer outside of the United States was established in Tunisia, Petrolin, who's the current Caterpillar dealer in Tunisia and Libya. And in fact, many of our dealers in Africa have histories of over 75 years. Between Caterpillar and our dealers, we have over 15,000 employees on the ground in Africa, and more than 95% of those are Africans. But we're not just selling equipment in Africa. We're also adding value on the continent, employing African managers and leaders, technicians, and salespeople, teaching valuable technical skills through training, and also supporting programs aimed at empowering girls and women through the Caterpillar Foundation, which happens to be the 12th largest corporate foundation worldwide. Africa has really come a long way, and I have to say I'm going to share a short anecdote from my days as a young rep in working in Africa. And we were traveling in Guinea in the bauxite belt towards the town of Sangareti, and we'd been on the road for hours together. And we didn't know where we were, how far we had to go until getting there. There was no GPS back then. And we saw a pedestrian on the side of the road, and we stopped, and we asked him, we said, "How far is it to Sangareti?" And the gentleman looked at us, and he said, "Oh, you take the left fork, and it's about an hour." And we were like, "An hour? We really are lost." And so we took the left fork, and we arrived at Sangareti within 5 minutes. And really what that tells me, the lesson for me, is that the context at the time was extremely different from the context that I was used to. And all of you in this room and on our podium here, I think, recognize a very different Africa today. But one fact still remains. There's a need for $100 billion of infrastructure investment in Africa. And today, less than half of that is actually occurring. And so with this distinguished panel that we have here, I hope that we can start to dive into this challenge and this issue and hopefully hear about some interesting solutions from the panel, and then we can open it up to the floor to hear some of your questions and thoughts as well. But this panel is really a great representation of the full spectrum, I think, of infrastructure. We've already heard from Samuel Dossou, who gave a good picture of a vision to support the oil and gas industry. It requires significant infrastructure in order for that to work. We also have with us Gilberto Rodrigues, who is the CEO of Mota-Engil, and his company is working on large infrastructure projects, building rail and airports and roads and mine site development. On the other spectrum, we have Paul Sullivan, who's the Director of International Business Development at Acrow Bridge, and they're in the business of essentially connecting the rural villages of Africa through bridges that are mobile, that they can bring to bear rapidly and connect the nations of Africa, the rural to the cities. And finally, we have Angela Nalikka, who's the Chief Investment Officer, Private Sector Operations for the African Development Bank. And so she's going to help us understand how we can weave together these projects through a strong and sustainable financial backing. So right now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask for our panelists to give a brief introduction, a little bit of background about themselves and their businesses. We've already heard from Samuel, so I guess I'll go straight over to Gilberto, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about Mota-Engil.
Thank you so much, David. Good morning to all of you. Mota-Engil Africa is an African company which has started in 1946 in Angola. So we have got 68 years of experience working the continent. We have been exposed to over 22 countries in Africa. Today we are currently working in 11 countries in the continent. We have got 14,500 local employees, and like Caterpillar also, we invest a lot in our local resources up to the management level, and we believe that is the way for the company to have sustainability on the years to come. Mota-Engil is a large company. We do $1.5 billion turnover per year in Africa. Our biggest market is still Angola. We are well diversified in the west part of Africa, on the east part of Africa, and also on the SADC region. We are primarily a construction company, but we have been diversifying into environment, into energy, into logistics. So, and we are facing more challenges in terms of go further in our diversification in the continent. We have a quote in the company. Normally we say that we are an African solution for African challenges. So when we hear Mr. Dossou presentation, I become extremely eager to participate with him and see how can we shape his vision and make it possible. Myself, I'm in Africa in the last 14 years. I have worked in several countries in Africa, and today our headquarters are in South Africa, and I'm based there. Although I think I've most of my time flying from A to B, and it's a pleasure to be with you today. Thank you so much.
Paul.
Thank you, David. My name is Paul Sullivan. I'm the Director of International Business Development for Acrow Bridge. I'd like to start by giving my appreciation for David's opening remark, where he stated that the road to growth and prosperity begins with a road. Acrow Bridge has built its entire strategy around the idea that you cannot have a road without a bridge. So that is where we would lead our remarks, because our strategy is certainly, our growth strategy is centered around Africa. One statistic I'll share with you that puts it into a little bit of context. Statistics show that the DRC alone needs north of 20,000 bridges, which is extraordinary when you think that that number is really writ large across the continent. There's an enormous infrastructure deficit, as we all know, across Africa, which requires roads, bridges, et cetera. And we feel, in particular, that the rural road networks are critical to connecting people to schools, hospitals, economic opportunity, the development of the agricultural sector. So that's why we're here, and that's why we're a proud sponsor of this conference and CCA as well. So a little background on Acrow. We specialize in the design, manufacture, and supply of prefabricated modular steel bridges. We've been in this business for over 60 years. We've supplied our bridging solutions to over 80 countries around the world. Our commitment to Africa goes back several decades. We've implemented our bridging projects in over 20 countries. And those projects essentially shake out into three broad baskets. The first would be serving aid projects. We've worked extensively with the United Nations and the World Bank in Sierra Leone, Liberia, South Sudan, the DRC, Tanzania. We've also worked with USAID. I just returned from Tanzania last week, where we installed 3 24-meter bridges in 7 days in rural Tanzania. So that's the first basket. The second basket would be private sector, extractive industries, heavy construction. We work extensively with mining companies, oil and gas, heavy construction where they need to develop access bridging. And we're able to do that because our bridging technology allows for rapid mobilization of our bridging, as well as handling very heavy loads. We can handle loads in excess of 150 metric tons, which is critical, particularly in the mining industry where you have obviously very heavy loads moving material to and from, which is critical to the extractive industries because a lot of their infrastructure, the infrastructure doesn't exist. So to access these commodities, many of which are in remote areas, they have to build their own infrastructure, and that's where Acrow serves as a partner. And we've done that in several countries from the DRC to Guinea. The third basket would be the public sector, where we participate in public tenders, where public sector entities like the Ministry of Public Works, Ministry of Transport, Department of Feeder Roads, rural roads agencies will hold tenders for bridge projects, and we will participate, succeed, and implement those projects. But I think what we've been doing recently presents the most transformative opportunities, not just for our partners in Africa, but also for Acrow. And it's what we call a financed comprehensive bridge development program. And with that program, what we're doing is we're trying to address specific needs. When we talk with policymakers in Africa, they routinely start with, we need lots of bridges right now. In fact, we needed them yesterday. Secondly, we need finance. We need the funding. Our annual budget is not going to permit 50, 100, and 150 bridges. And then the third part, which has been of increasing concern over the last 10 to 15 years, is making sure that infrastructure projects are implemented in a way that utilizes local employment, local skills, and we're there to assist with the skills capacity building. We engage in extensive training on the ground in Africa. So to address those issues, those needs, we developed these financed comprehensive bridge development programs where we work with public sector entities, as I mentioned, Ministry of Public Works, Transport, Department of Feeder Roads, et cetera, to develop a program with them where we develop an inventory of bridges needed throughout the country with all of the specifications attached there to length, width, live load, which is the weight crossing the bridge. And we develop a comprehensive proposal which will allow for bridging to be delivered in a very short period of time. Examples of this recently are in Angola in 2009, where we supplied 151 bridges in 9 months. In 2011, Stephen Hayes mentioned Acrow supplied 100 bridges to Ghana and their Department of Feeder Roads. But where does the money come from? And that's where this program also deals with that issue. Acrow works with its partners in the international capital markets, Societe Generale, Citigroup, Deutsche Bank, et cetera. We also work with export credit agencies. Obviously, we're an American company, so we're working with Export-Import Bank of the United States. And then the third part, which we find most compelling, is the local training. Acrow does not install the Acrow bridges. It is local engineers, technicians, and contractors who are trained extensively in the assembly, installation, and maintenance of these critical bridging infrastructure assets. So we bring these projects, we work very closely with African governments and the appropriate agencies, and then implement large quantities of bridging in a very short period of time. I mentioned earlier the project in Ghana and Angola. In 2015, we have 2 projects on the continent that will involve over 200 bridges, and we're very excited about that. So I'll be brief after being long, and really it's just, we're very pleased to be here. We're committed to Africa. It's a decades-long commitment, and we feel like, as everyone else here is aspiring to do, is bringing innovative solutions to deal with this massive infrastructure deficit in a way that's sustainable and expands the skills capacity base on the continent.
Thank you. Angela.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Angela Nalikka, I'm in charge of private sector infrastructure and PPPs for the African Development Bank. The African Development Bank was set up in 1964. Very brief history about it. I'm sure Onike did a good job yesterday. It was set up in 1964 by the African countries. 50 years later, we have 78 members, 54 of them African, and the rest are non-African. I'm glad to say that, of course, the US is one of the top shareholders of the African Development Bank. We are pleased to be part of the CCA Africa. We play a triple role on the African continent. We're financiers. We finance the public and private sector. We are partners, but I think most important of all, we are regarded as the honest broker by the African countries and the private and public sector bodies. We are currently operating in all the African countries in one way or shape or form, either advising or lending, either public or private. We do have a number of opportunities that we would like to discuss with all those who would be interested in all the different sectors. Currently, we have a very large and growing portfolio in the private sector. The private sector part of the bank was set up, I think, about 20 years ago. We've been able to do in the last 8 years over 13 billion in funding, and we're growing, and we continuously look for more partners to help with the growth of infrastructure in Africa.
Excellent. Thank you, Angela. So, question then, I guess, with the African Development Bank and African countries, international agencies all talking about transformative infrastructure projects. Samuel, in what ways is the Backbone project that you described an illustration of such a project?
The Backbone project really reflects our conviction in Petrolin Group. In all our investment, we think that we have to share with the population. We took from our money of exploration to put in railway. You know, each time railway arrives in the village develops because the population can produce and export freely to the big market. And our road in Africa is very difficult to manage. And the trucks also doesn't help the villages because when they produce and load their goods to the markets, a lot of people stop the cars, the trolleys, and ask for many questions to know who you are and things like that. But with railway, we have no problem like that. It's a kind of vision we have to win the tender. Today, we are the concessionaire of the railway from Cotonou to Parakou and Niamey through Dossou because there was an international tender launched by the two countries, and we win the tender.
Good, thank you. And Gilberto, I guess moving to Mota-Engil, how has your company adapted its strategy to meet the unique context of the challenges that you find in Africa and the opportunities?
Well, thank you, David, for the question. We have been in Africa for 68 years and been adapting ourselves and adjust ourselves to the context of each cycle that Africa has been passing through. So today we are seeing a very rampant Africa with lots of opportunities, lots of players coming from all corners of the world. And Africa, in fact, is growing at such level that we can accommodate everyone, in fact. Ourselves, we have designed the company in order to tackle most of what have been said here. to tackle the opportunities, to tackle the challenge, to work for a public entity, but also to work for private. And in fact, we shall emphasize here the real value of the private sector and the real value that the private sector has got to transform the landscaping in Africa. Governments have got limited budgets, as everyone knows. The population in Africa is growing tremendously. The level of spending with education and health has been bigger and bigger and bigger. In some countries, even to support the food security is a huge demand from national budget. So in order to promote development, indeed, we have to go across the border and see how can we mitigate those needs and provide those solutions. So Mota-Engil, working in 10 countries today, working for private clients, for public clients, doing roads and bridges and so on. Also big infrastructure projects like railways in Malawi for the mining companies, like the one that we have won now in Cameroon of $3.5 billion for Sundance, for an iron ore mining company. We have adapted ourselves to work across the client, across the landscaping, to promote value, to bring other stakeholders, and to be, as a matter of fact, a big partner of governments. We consider ourselves as a partner of governments. We tackle the challenge, and because of our experience in the continent, we perceive risk in a different manner. And this is a very important question, because risk, or the way that you perceive risk, has changed considerably from last month or 2 months ago when was a USA summit here from now. We could see a huge difference on the way that people tackle projects in Africa and even the attitude towards to the projects in Africa. The Africans, they don't need paternalism. The Africans really they need is someone to be aligned with themselves and to be a strong partner towards to accomplish the vision. And some of the institutions that we have seen financing Africa in development having a paternalist attitude throughout of the years. So it is time to break it and to move away. And I really am happy that the ADB is moving towards that direction, because it's the way to go. It's the way to promote the capital from the private sector to also alleviate some of the regulations and level them in order to be a more friendly, competitive market. So yes, we have adapted to all these things, and we are working hard to grow under these conditions.
Excellent. So I sense, and I've been hearing as I've had discussions with many in this room and elsewhere, that there's a shift which is taking place, moving from public sector to private sector. And I guess I'll jump over to Angela here, and maybe you can tell us why the ADB is so focused on infrastructure growth and the private sector in particular.
Okay. We recognize the limitations of the government, also of the ADB. The magnitude of the need is such that we will need partners. African governments will need partners. Even the private sector companies will need partners just for the risk mitigation. That's the main point. But regarding why infrastructure, why invest in African infrastructure, I think the economists have been very clear. There is an addition of 2% to the GDP of any country that has developed infrastructure. Africa is part of the global world. I'll just give you a small example. We recently met with a gentleman, a Chinese gentleman, working for a US-German company in China. He was selling industrial units in Benin and Burkina Faso. So it is very clear that Africa is integral and part of the global economic landscape, and you can only ignore it at your own peril. Secondly, infrastructure also will help us in terms of security. We do have these dangerous franchises that have cropped up. Africa has not been spared. We have Al-Shabaab from Al-Qaeda. But for Africa, it's unique that it's mostly been most prevalent in areas where there is no infrastructure. They are cut off from the main society. So there is a case for infrastructures in that respect. The third point is that the population. We have a fairly young population. I think it's the youngest in the world. This population is connected. We all know mobile phones have taken hold in Africa. And they're actually demanding. They're demanding services. They're demanding certain standards. And it's slowly coming through. It may not be the Arab Spring, but it is moving. And the last point, I think Africa is the last, I can safely say, it's the last frontier where you can actually make big returns in infrastructure. We've seen returns from 12 to 20%. So there is a business case to make real, genuine money in infrastructure in Africa. And the African Development Bank is really on the forefront of passing the message, come to Africa, come and make money. There is a lot of opportunity for growth and a lot of opportunity for just the low-hanging fruit, bridges, the mining infrastructure, the railroads that are anchored on the mineral, the great mineral resource of Africa. So we really are putting infrastructure in the center and front of African development.
That's great. Risk but reward, too. And I guess, Paul, maybe you can share some of the success stories that you've had, and I mean, how have you achieved it? Any tricks of the trade or ways that you were able to achieve that success, recognizing that there was risk and of course reward as well?
Well, earlier I talked about the 100 bridges we supplied to Ghana in 2011, and that was a financed comprehensive bridge development program. I think common denominator for our success, not just in Africa but anywhere, number one, it starts with the relationships. And as with any relationship that's successful, you must know yourself as well as understand the needs of your partner. I think when Acrow looks in the mirror, what it sees is a product that is perfect for infrastructure development in Africa. Our bridges are steel, galvanized steel. They last 75 plus years. It's modular components, which can be easily customized to conditions on site. All of the components fit within 40-foot high cube containers, so they're easily dispatched from our port in New Jersey to all points around the globe. The bridges can be installed within days or weeks, rapid assembly, easily assembled by local workers who have little or no engineering expertise but can be trained in the assembly and installation of these bridges. Just to give you an example, as I mentioned earlier, we just supplied and installed 3 bridges in 7 days in Tanzania. Our specification with the United States military, where we supplied over 80 bridges to Afghanistan, was the military's ability to install a 51-meter bridge by hand within 24 hours. Yet these bridges can handle very large capacities, weight capacities, as we mentioned with the mining industry, live loads in excess of 150 metric tons. This is important because a lot of the rural roads are unsupervised, so very heavy loads are often crossing these bridges, so we're able to design for that. So understanding those key features is important to making sure that our partners understand the benefits. On the partner side, we need to understand their needs, and oftentimes, most times, it's more than just the bridging. It's also the financing, and then that emphasis, as I mentioned earlier, on the local skills capacity building. And that's where we weave all of these into these larger programs. So it starts with that relationship, knowing yourself, knowing your customer. And then I would say, certainly another part of it is being present. Acrow is not mailing in its business development efforts from a cozy conference room in New Jersey. We're on the continent monthly. We have local partners in every market that we are focused on. And those local partners are on the ground day after day after day helping us develop projects. So being present is, and frequently present is critical. And then I would say the third part is knowing how to leverage what we would call business development multipliers. And I'll start with USG, United States government. They've been an outstanding partner for us throughout the years, exercising economic diplomacy, helping us get in to meet the relevant decision makers who understand how these bridge projects can be put together. We have incredible commercial service officers and political econ officers who are very savvy as to the local conditions and how to not only help win business, but also maintain that business and implement the project in a way that makes all the stakeholders feel that it was a positive outcome. And then, of course, organizations like CCA. We mentioned we've been a member of CCA for over a decade. We're deeply committed to CCA and the relationships we build from that partnership. You know, our Ghana project was sourced from the financing perspective at an infrastructure conference that obviously was hosted by CCA. And with Vivian Sekera's leadership, we've been able to access many other partners who have led to projects that are going online in 2015 for over 200 bridges. So I think without CCA, and this isn't a shameless plug, but without CCA, we really wouldn't be where we are on the continent. So when you think about those business development multipliers, it's allowing us to punch above our weight in moments where we can't see every corner. So again, the relationships, certainly being present and using business development partners along the way has been the key to our success.
Good. I have some great pointers for U.S. firms that might be in the room and are looking for lessons learned on how they could go forward in Africa. For a company, Gilberto, like yours that works in multiple countries, tell me about the question of scale. I mean, are you able to achieve scale in such a diverse continent that is made up of, you know, African countries that each have certain laws and regulations? You know, how do you handle that? Have you been able to leverage your scale?
It's a good question, and in fact, it's a very important because it's on the top of the agenda. How to grow in Africa, how to expand from countries A to B, how to be able to move your assets around countries. Mota-Engil started in 1946 in Angola. In 1977, we started moving away from Angola, keeping Angola, of course, but going into other countries. 4 years ago, we are in 6 countries. Today, we are in 11 countries. So it is not difficult to gain scale in the continent. You need to have, obviously, commitment, you have to be disciplined, you have to be organized, as you have to be, for instance, in Europe, on the old times before EU. So it is possible you gain scale if you go across borders, because you gain a level of synergies. And there are 2 types of synergies. It's the synergy of your own operation, but also the synergy created by your reputation. So when you are working in Malawi, in Zambia, in Zimbabwe, in Mozambique, all these ministers, they know that there is a company called Mota-Engil Africa building a roads elsewhere, or a railway there, or a port there, and they talk to each other. So you gain from that. You gain from the reputation that you have. But it's extremely important to understand that we are working in different countries, different regulations, different legislation, and also different culture. Perhaps the most difficult thing to understand the way to be in Africa is to apprehend the concept that Africa is not a big country. Africa is 54 countries with total different cultures, which you have to understand before you start doing business. So, yes, you can gain volume, you can gain scale, you can have your synergies, you can create multiples of product on the ground, or in terms of supply chain, for instance, that make your operation become more efficient. But you need to understand as well that approach to a market has to be take into account the specifics of that particular market. We are able to, we've been able to grow in all these countries and been able to create an advantage as well on the commercial terms. Because when you are working, for instance, in Malawi and you have to move to Mozambique, I have only to move 150 kilometers, 200 kilometers, cross the border, yes, but if you have your paperwork in good shape. There is no problem crossing the border. And you just move your machines from country A to a country B. If there's a company coming from any other part in the world, they have to ship it by a boat to a port, from a port, take a truck, from the truck, take it to the site. So just the cost of that is huge. So the commitment that we have towards to Africa in terms of investment and create conditions, creating values in the company, adopting an African culture in terms of relationship and networking, but also to invest a lot in human resources, promotes across borders a huge advantage. There's another important thing which is quite new. Africa has been seen as a continent of exporting and perhaps importing. And cross-border transactions are not very evident. If we analyze the cross-borders between Malawi and Zambia, or Zambia and Tanzania, or Zambia and DRC, the volume of transactions are small. But with the wealth that Africa is gaining day by day, the level of transactions also, they are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So there is an internal market that's been created, and this internal market will grow in size in the next 20 years. So we have also to be prepared to understand this new reality, and also to tackle all the advantages that we have when you are in a region and you can create conditions for you to move in accordance with the demand. So we have been able to do it. Needs effort, of course, needs commitment, but we have been successful.
Thank you. No, I think you made some great points, and particularly the importance, really, for trade to flow freely, it requires infrastructural links between countries, and I think that's a great point. And at the same time, links between countries, it's also links with the local communities.
Yes.
And I don't know, maybe Samuel, you could touch on the importance of that in your project.
Local community is very important because we have to explain to them what we are doing. When you come and tell them to get out from them because you want to create a petroleum port or to bring the railway or to build something, they have to understand. And you should have also, the government should have also good compensation. In our case, for petroleum port and mineral port in Seme, the government give us 1,006 hectares, but out of that, 400,000 hectares belong to population. Then we set up a rule to indemnify the people before we start working. And the government asked us to finance that. We accept it because we should do that. If not, you are not in good condition for working. And our production in Nigeria also, we are working with 6 communities. We take care of the children in boarding school and things like that. It's the reason why good relationship with all the partners involved, the government, the local people, of course, our international partner is very important.
Excellent. Thank you for those comments. I think, Angela, I'm going to give you the last word at this point. And yesterday we had a presentation from one of your colleagues at the African Development Bank, and she didn't want to steal the thunder from today about a new important new program, and so maybe you could say a few words about Africa 50.
Okay. Thank you. We at the African Development Bank recognized very early on that we will have to find innovative ways of raising funding for Africa's infrastructure. There is a gap of 100 or so billion, depending on who you talk to, but it's in hundreds of billions of dollars in terms of the gap. I think in any one year, the governments can only do so much. The regional development banks can only do so much, so is all the partners, institutions. So we need to find an avenue or vehicle where we can tap into African private sector. African governments, we estimate they invest about 500 billion or so annually in overseas markets. What we'd like them to do is bring about 5% to this new vehicle. Sovereign wealth funds, pension funds would also be likely target. This vehicle start off with is $1 billion. ADB has already committed 300 million towards investing. It will have two arms. One will be for project development company within the institution, and then the other one will be for investing. Towards the project development, I think the ADB has committed around $100 million. The company's been incorporated in Morocco. It's actually open for business. We do have a CEO who will be, I think, around later on or tomorrow. So we will be looking for investors in those two vehicles, but at the same time, we will be looking to co-develop or co-invest on projects that
so those
we
will be equity investments?
Equity investments. Okay. But we will also be looking to co-develop projects that are already ready. It is an initiative that is going to complement the other initiatives we've had in the past, like the Africa Exim Bank and the Africa Trade Insurance to offer PRI. So we hope that along with the African Development Bank, we can be a sort of a one-stop shop for all infrastructure development, from guarantees to insurance to funding to advice and to actually developing projects.
That's fantastic. I mean, you know, everybody has been extremely positive about the Power Africa initiative. You know, personally, I think it's time that world leaders get together and really talk about a Build Africa initiative as well. It's just as important. With that, I mean, do we have, Vivian, a few minutes for questions? 2 minutes? Okay, so let's open the floor to some questions. It's hard for me to see you, so if you could stand up and let us know who you are and to whom you'd like to address the question. We'll try and field it. We're going to get you a microphone, okay? So.
Hi, everyone. My name's Robert Knutson. I'm president of Omni Housing, and we produce a very low-cost fiberglass house for Africa. I'm a former mortgage investment banker on Wall Street. Don't hold that against me. For 38 years. And from the bottom of my heart, I love Africa. Buwani Areme, Sheshe Dani. So I'm getting there. I see I'm the only guy at the conference, regrettably, on housing. And I've done my homework. 80% of Africa, and let's just cut to the chase, ladies and gentlemen, live in slums. In 3 months, it's 2015. It's not 1850. We need to focus more than ever on housing young families. The average age of the African citizen is 18 years old. 80% of Nigeria lives on $2 a day. The per capita income of Nigeria is $1,500. It's the 7th largest exporter of oil and gas to the world. Poland, the same size of economy. The average age of the Nigerian is 17.9 years. The average age of the Polish person is 45 years. I'm using McKinsey, World Bank, CIA statistics. Certainly, we have to focus on education to help these people learn more skills. 95% of Nigeria's income is from export of oil and gas. So could we address the housing issue and what we're doing to help the average and poor African have housing, not the rich person?
Thank you. I mean, I'm not sure if there's a breakout on on housing as it relates to infrastructure in this conference, or else, Steve, maybe that's a note for a future subject of the CCA. Any other comments from the panelists, or?
Yeah, actually, I left out one institution that was actually set up by the African Development Bank. It's called Shelter Afrique. It's precisely to help address the question of housing, quality housing, affordable housing. It's based in Nairobi, so there is a potential partner for you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes? No?
Someone not there.
Right here?
Thank you. My question is for Mr. Dossou. From your experience as an indigenous investor in Africa, would you say that multinationals, international companies, have done a good job in issues of social responsibility while doing business? And there is this question of double standards. The standards they apply in Europe and in America are different from the standards that they apply in Africa in the issue of social responsibilities, especially oil companies. What do you think?
First of all, I have to say that when oil companies come in the country, they sign contract with the government. And each country have action made to help also the population working with the oil companies to be in very safe condition of work. This raised the problem on how the government himself follow this kind of work. And the situation is different from one country to another. But to come back to the way Petrolin Group work, everywhere we are, we have program to alleviate the situation, to help the population to live properly. But this kind of question is key, and you know that there are many NGOs working on that. I fully support the fact that something has to be done, and more indigenous companies are being created. They have also to give example, because it's about their brothers, it's about their family. And in Africa, the way we live, you don't develop yourself without taking care of your village, of your neighbor. It's the only answer I have today, but we should do the maximum we can do to help our population. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, with that, I think we're going to have to...
One gentleman down there.
Is there one more?
Down there.
In the back?
Yeah.
Sir?
Yeah.
My name is Nicholas Okafor from Udodoma and Belosage. And my question is to the gentleman from Caterpillar. The interesting part of your presentation was when you spoke about risk perception. Because for some of us that have been involved in documenting the projects that have been implemented across Africa, we discover that the issue of risk perception is one of the key impediments that has held back some investors. Why those that, like you, that have managed to perceive the risks differently and managed it differently, have taken advantage of what is happening and are expanding? Can you just, for the benefit of this forum, tell us a little bit more of your experience in managing the risk perception, some of which are, from my experience, overbloated. Because those on the ground understand that some of these risks are not as they are really presented. And those that took the risk, telecoms, various areas, have seen that actually the risks are over. So if you could just share more of that for the benefit of the audience so that they understand that the risk perception is important in investing in Africa and not hide all manner of things under the guise of bankability and then walk away.
Yeah, thank you for the question, actually. I said risk, and I also said reward. And I think that's the important message that I would like to leave this group with. I think that the risks are well known. Perhaps they're too well known because the world media tends to focus more on the risks in Africa than on the amazing things that are happening on the ground in Africa. And it's easy, you just look at the news today in terms of Ebola, in terms of Boko Haram, in terms of Al-Qaeda, in terms of pick any humanitarian disaster. That's what we hear about, unfortunately. What we need is we need to talk about the great things that are happening on the ground relative to business, relative to education, relative to investment. A great takeaway that I had from the Africa Leaders Summit here in Washington back in August, and Gilberto touched on it, was that there was just such a strong, overwhelming message from African leaders that we want trade, not aid. And aid is something which you can link really to disaster relief and helping overcome risk in Africa, whereas trade is something which is far more sustainable and is going to build communities and is going to build the continent for many years to come. So I guess that's the comment that I'd make to that. At this point, it's been a long time since we've been going without a break, and I want to ask you to please put your hands together for this terrific panel. What a great job that they did. Thank you.